Welcome, Mariska. How are you? Thank you for being
I'm
here.
I'm good. Like
Yes.
I always say I'm good, and then I'm just like, how often is that entirely true? I'm like, I am as normal, which is generally I'm content with. Let's just say that.
It's so funny that you're saying that. I always like when people say, "Oh, how are you?" It's like, well, I don't know. Do they really want to know how I'm doing? Like, because like MS is kind of kicking my ass right now. Like, do you care? Like you already, like you. For me, I'm always like in the middle. Like, do I really tell or not tell? So I don't know.
Well, so I'm a dual citizen, so I'm a Dutch citizen and an American. And
Oh,
I've had different cousins of mine from the Netherlands stay with me for extended periods of time. And I remember when my cousin Chantal came, she was like, why, when you go into stores, do people always ask, how are you? What are you supposed to say? And I'm like, oh, that's just, considered polite that
yeah,
people just ask, how are you? She's like,
right.
what am I supposed to say? And I said, you're supposed to say good or great or fine. And it's like one answer. She's like, they don't really care, do they? And I'm like, no, they don't actually care. So you're
Yeah,
good. You don't need to actually be honest in
right.
that situation.
I guess it's just an American thing because I don't know. Other countries don't really do that. I don't know. Yeah. So, or maybe they do. I don't know. It's just basic.
Yeah, I think it is a uniquely American thing to just ask that all the time. Instead
Right.
of, like a normal thing is you go into a store, like I would think is kind of normal. Can I help you find anything? Would be a normal question to ask if you work at a store.
Right.
Asking a complete stranger, how's your life? Like, is anything new with you? That would not be normal, but that's normal for us.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny how cultures, shift and like tell us about ourselves really because it's like, are we really being honest when you ask? So yeah. But speaking of honest, I wanted to dive in because you're here to chat with me about, all things MS and neuro and Pilates and all that good stuff. But before we really dive in, would you mind sharing a little bit about, or as much as you want, about your MS journey or your MS story?
So, I was like working on this memoir right now. And so sort of my beginning of it is like, do I say that it all started with like my fingertips going numb at this point? Or did it all start with me having, chronic like bad infections and stuff in high school where I was sick all the time? Like, is that where it started? Or, where did it really start? It's like I can say when I got diagnosed and then I can look back. And I think most of us in the MS world can say that. We can say like, okay, well, this is what my diagnosing thing was. But then if I rewind 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 years, then you can say that, what you had all these other things as well. But I was diagnosed in 2002. I had moved to DC without a job right after, like I was kind of taken back to September 11th, 2001. So on September 11th, 2001, I was on an airplane when all the planes were forced to land because of what was happening on September 11th. I was actually supposed to move to DC on September 12th, 2001, but through a variety of things that happened kind of around the time of September 11th, I didn't. And I actually ended up moving in with my parents to sort of reassess, because there was a relationship that was ending, and like reassess my plans to move to DC. So I didn't end up moving to DC until June of 2002. So when I moved to DC, my vision wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it for probably 2 to 3 days, but I was just like, I couldn't focus my eyes and I couldn't really make sense of that. And I realized that when I looked to the left, I started seeing 2 of everything. And I was like, well, that's not good. Like, I don't know what that is, but I know that seems serious. So I called my mom because I had moved from like the Virginia Beach area and told her what was going on. And she made an appointment for me with an ophthalmologist, and then came and got me because you really probably shouldn't be driving if you see two of everything when you look to the left. And so when I went to this ophthalmologist, who was a huge bitch, she was asking me, all these questions about, did my purse feel heavy? I was like, no. Well, first of all, my purse is like tiny. So I was like, no, it's fine. And then she was like, well, do you have anything else, weird that's going on? And I was like, well, my feet are numb. And then she said, well, how long have your feet been numb? And I'm like, well, my left foot's been numb for like 6 months. And then my right foot, it went numb like a month ago. And then she was like, ugh, why didn't you tell me that? And I'm like, well, because you're an eye doctor. Like, why in the world would I tell you my feet are numb? Like, that's
Right.
so weird. And then she's like, oh, well, it's probably MS. And then, I don't know anything about MS at this point. And I'm just like, I think I started crying because, at the same time, like my life is really weird. And she was like, well, it's not fatal. And she was just very dismissive. And then she ordered an MRI, which I had really bad insurance at the time. So I didn't have the ability to get in anywhere quickly. So I didn't get an MRI for another 3 weeks. And then I didn't get the results of that MRI for another 3 weeks. So it was 6 weeks from that appointment. And in that time, I had spent a lot of time on, Dr. Google. And there was so much stuff in there about MS that I was like, I've had that. And it was going back years that I could say like, oh yeah, numbness, tingling, like slurred speech, like all these things that I had over, probably 5 years prior to getting diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say I've had it for the majority of my adult life. And, a lot of people are probably getting it in their teens and they're not really symptomatic enough for it to be something that is diagnosed until 20s 30s.
Totally agree. I feel like I had something going on at like 16 and then again at 18, but I was a soccer player, so I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, I just like kicked the ball funny and so my feet feel tingly, you know what I mean? You just don't think of that. And like, especially if you don't know anybody who has MS around you, like nobody had I didn't know. And in college I remember like having a really terrible breakout and like the sun and the heat intolerance. And I think like I associated the breakout with the sun, but who knows, I don't know, but I had some sort of reaction. But and then I had like a really bad fall. And I think that's what triggered it finally at like 24. So I was like 25 when they fully diagnosed me, but I had those issues, like you said, beforehand. So
yeah, I would say probably my earliest issues were getting like these really horrible migraines whenever I got hot. And I grew up in a beach town. So I grew up in Virginia Beach and I was, at the beach a lot. And I was, often getting overheated in the summer. And I was just like, God, like summer just kills me. I was like, I don't know. It's like, it's too bright. It's too whatever. And I would just get these horrible, horrible, horrible migraines. And then I would have lots of just random things happen. Like all my fingertips would go numb, but it would only last for a couple of minutes and then it would go away. And what do you even do with that?
Right.
You're just like, are you going to go to the doctor because your fingertips went numb for, 5 seconds? At that time, I don't even think Google existed. So I wasn't looking it up. I was just like, oh, all my fingertips went numb. Now, if that happened, I'd be like, all of my fingertips went numb. What could it mean?
So did the doctor say you have optic neuritis when you were with her, or
No, because I didn't. She said you have 6th cranial nerve palsy, which is double vision. So she was like, you have double vision. And then at the time I remember before, this is before she was asking me about my purse. She was like, well, you have 6th cranial nerve palsy, but it's, we can fix it with prism glasses. Right. And I have since that time, I have seen prism glasses. They look actually like regular glasses. They
Right.
just are prisms. So they bend the light in a certain way so you wouldn't see two of everything. But, I'm, 27 years old. I'm like newly out of a terrible relationship. I just moved to a new city. I'm thinking like the bottle cap glasses, like for the people who like have like no vision at all. Cause I'm thinking prisms like you'd have on a chandelier.
Yes.
And then I'm like, well, I'm never ever nobody's gonna date me. I'm going to die alone. Like these are the thoughts that
Oh
are
yeah.
going through my head. And then it was weird because when I finally, got the MS diagnosis, and I feel like I was diagnosed quickly, because from the time I cried, like something is wrong, to getting diagnosed was fast. It was like 6 weeks. But the first symptoms to getting diagnosed was like 5 years. And I know there's so many people who go through years and years and years being misdiagnosed, or nobody orders them an MRI, and they're going through unnecessary spinal taps and all these things that shouldn't be happening to them. Like they're going through like a long period of time. So I would say I was like a fast diagnosis. But when she said it's probably MS, me not knowing anything about MS, I just remember feeling like this gut punch, because I was like, you're right. Even though I didn't know anything about it. Like I knew that's what it was, and I knew it was bad. And then because, my life was all falling apart at that time, I think it actually ended up, I don't look at it as a good thing all the time for me 20 years in, but at the time it was good for me because it sort of snapped me out of this funk that I had been in, because I was like, I don't have time. I mean, who knows how much time any of us have, but I was like, I don't have time to have a pity party. I need to get a job. I need to get better health insurance. I need to do the things that I want to do, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to do them later.
Wow. So do you think that those thoughts the initial thoughts that you were having led you to the path that you took and that you're currently on now, like with yoga, fitness, Pilates, things like that?
I think, so a little illustration about who I am as a person.
Yes.
I am extremely stubborn. I always say I got, an A in physics in college out of spite, because the teacher implied that I wasn't smart enough to understand something. And I was like, F you, buddy, I'm like going to like kill it in this class. So when I got diagnosed with MS, I was like, I will figure this out. Like everything's going to be fine. Nothing bad is going to happen to me, because I can figure out what to do. And I, started doing research online and found a lot of information that, looking back was not actually extremely accurate, but I just jumped on everything at once. So I was like, I'm not eating this. I'm going to go vegetarian. I'm not drinking alcohol. I'm going to bed at 10 p.m. every night. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to take up yoga. I'm going to do this. And it was just like all these things. I was like, I'll do this. I'll do this. I'll do this. I'll do this. And then it will never touch me. And then, a lot of us, when we're first diagnosed, it's like we might have like some really bad and scary flare-ups, but a lot of times we can get it under control. And all of our progression is happening super slowly in the background over years and years and years and years. So we think we won, right? We think we beat it. We're like, I didn't eat this. And therefore, maybe we're judging other people whose MS has gotten worse, because you're just like, well, probably shouldn't be going out drinking all the time, or you should probably be meditating, or you should probably be doing whatever. And I think I just had this very cocky attitude that I thought that I wasn't going to have progression because I didn't have any that I saw for so long. It's like I had some bad flare-ups like right at the beginning that were really scary. So I went on like the hardcore drugs, but then I also, because I threw the kitchen sink I was probably taking 30 supplements a day. I was doing acupuncture. I was doing like some really weird stuff. I was doing colonics. Like name something, I was doing it to try to be like the most detoxed, healthy person like you would ever meet. And then, I always tell people, because I feel like I'm a lot of people's MS spirit guide, like when they're newly diagnosed, I'm like, yeah. And then I just got tired of like not having any fun, and then you start to add stuff back in because you're just like, I mean, like really no sugar ever. Like, I don't think that me starting to have like some chocolate or whatever, or, actually having a cookie or a piece of cake or whatever has anything to do with where I am now. And I think we're so brainwashed to believe that we can fix it with diet, we can fix it with supplements, that if we change anything, there's something called orthorexia, where people get like super hyper focused on like their lifestyle, because they're like, my lifestyle is keeping me from not being able to walk or whatever. When in fact, it's like, probably it's just there is arguably roughly half of disability is preventable through lifestyle changes, but not all disability is preventable. And I think there's a desire to try everything, to try to make sure.
I'm sorry. I'm going to edit this. Hold that thought. My bladder is going crazy. Just
Okay.
like 1 second. I'm so sorry.
I get it.
Okay. you were talking about orthorexia, and then
just getting, yeah, like I think a lot of people's, I think the main thing is that everyone wants somebody to say, this is the answer, this is the cure, this is the thing that will keep you from becoming disabled, this is the thing that will get you back from being disabled. And I think that a lot of people out there feed off of that in a very negative way, because there are people who take advantage of us, right? Because there's like the amount of Facebook ads I get for stuff where it's like, so-and-so cured their MS through the special diet. And I'm like, there's no cure for MS. Or they're like, you know, the comments, there's always like some weird African doctor swamp water mix that like gets commented on. I think there's
Right.
some bots out there that
Right.
are always telling you about something, and it's like cures, like names every
Some
disease in the world.
concoction. Yeah.
Some concoction, it cures this. And I feel like in the beginning, I was definitely, you know, that person that I was like, oh, well, maybe if I try this, or maybe if I do this, or maybe if I, you know, do a big detox thing. And it's like, without really even understanding, like, well, you know, your organs detox you all the time. You know, it's like, we don't necessarily need to be drinking cayenne pepper lemon juice all day for like weeks to be healthier. It's like, just eat less crap. You know, that is pretty much, you know, going to help everyone out there who's got anything wrong with them. Mm-hmm. And I think I just got to the point where I got fatigue. You know, it's like, we talk about medication and how, you know, you and I both were on injectable medications in the beginning, because that's what there was. And, you know, I stopped taking them because, you know, I got needle fatigue. And it's like, you just stopped taking it. You know, it's like, or you took it, if I was on Rebif, so if you were supposed to take it 3 times a week, you were taking it once a week, or it was very sporadic, like how I would do things, because I just got so tired of trying so hard. And then still everything was fine. So I'm like, everything's still fine. Nothing really changed. I was like, I think maybe I'm like, I think I have benign MS. I think I'm one of those people who's really lucky, who's got really mild MS, and like, nothing's going to happen to me, because nothing happened to me for, you know, roughly 8, 9, 10 years. And then all of a sudden you're just like realizing that maybe you're driving somewhere when you would have walked before, or you're sitting more when you would have been standing, or you're getting, you know, you're forgetting to do things, or you have to pee all the time. You know, there's just all this stuff starts happening, and you don't even necessarily put it towards what MS is, because I don't know about you, but when I got diagnosed, there was no handbook, there was no guide, there was no one telling me that it's like, this is what muscle spasticity is. So I had muscle spasticity for a very long time, untreated, where it actually turned into, for me, I have a joint contracture in my left ankle, because I had no idea that I didn't just have regular tight muscles.
Right.
So I never even mentioned it to my neurologist. And because I actually have a joint contracture, like when they do the test to see, you know, like if you do a test and you do the tendon hammer, mm-hmm. I would have a really extreme response, as most people with spasticity do. Yes. But, you know, I wasn't complaining about it to my doctor. So then he wasn't advising me on, right. They weren't looking at things. And I think, you know, I have an amazing neurologist. I absolutely love him. And he's been my neurologist since 2004. So I had a kind of a crappy one in the beginning, but I have an amazing one now. And I've been with him forever. And he's great, but if he's not asking the right questions, because I'm the person who, you know, you're like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm fabulous, even though there's all these little things that I'm just not thinking to bring up, you know? So I think my journey has been a very typical one. You know, I think a lot of people have periods of time that they think everything's great and awesome. And then, you know, you never know when it's going to come up and remind you that it's a serious medical condition.
Absolutely. I mean, your story, our stories are so similar, except I didn't have the vision issues. Like sometimes I sit back and I say, I'm a lucky one, you know, and the fact that I didn't think anything was like really wrong with me, you know what I mean? Like how you were saying, like, yeah, I'm in my 20s and, you know, I'm just like having too much fun or whatever thoughts that go through a young person's head, you know, like that kind of spun me or pushed me into denial. And so I was just like, this is not real until like I had, which is so crazy, right? Because like your onset, the symptoms that you're having are real and like it's not normal. Or the body's not supposed to do this, you know what I mean? Like, but I didn't think, I was just like, whatever, you know. But like then when I had another exacerbation, that's when I was like, okay, this is real. And then another one, and like that was when I said, this is not anything to take lightly.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who's a perfect example of progression independent of MRI activity. I do not have changing MRIs. My MRI has been, you know, it's like, here's my lesions. We get an MRI. It's like, there they are. They're not lighting up. They look exactly the same. Yet over time, you know, stuff has happened. Like I never had fatigue. Like I was like, I'm never tired. Like that's not an issue for me. I don't sleep, but that's, you know, that's a whole separate thing. But the reason I went on a very hardcore MS drug about 5 years ago was because it was a Sunday and my husband woke me up from a nap that I had started taking at 3 o'clock. And he was like, Game of Thrones is on. Do you want to like watch it? And I'm like, okay, Game of Thrones was on at 9 p.m. And I laid down to take a nap at 3 p.m. And 6-hour naps are not normal. Like that is just not a normal thing. Like unless you have the flu or COVID or something, like you shouldn't be taking a 6-hour nap. But I was just so tired all the time. And I didn't feel otherwise worse. Like I had, you know, I've had consistent issues with my left leg with walking, like that have been really consistent for like 12 years. But I had this, you know, increasing fatigue and, you know, my MRI didn't show anything, but, you know, my neurologist is like, you really can't be unmedicated. Because I'm medicated, I'm not taking medicine. I'm medicated, I'm not taking medicine. You know, I just go back and forth. Like if something scary happened, then I'd go back on medicine and then I'd be like, side effects, yuck. And then I'd go off of it. And then I would go back on something. And I really regret all the times that I went off medication, because I do think that those are the places where there probably was that progression happening that I didn't really notice or see. And I was still doing, you know, like pretty clean diet. I've always been an exercise person. So my exercise level has not changed. My exercise types have changed based on like things I could do, but I was always exercising. I just ended up having, you know, enough things that scared me to make me think like, you know, this isn't something that I want to trust that I can figure out, that I know more than all the researchers, all the doctors. You know, I think we're living in a world right now where that's such a common thing, where people are like, well, I did my own research. And I'm like, but did you really? Because do you have a control group? Do you have an experimental group? Like, did you repeat that in other situations? You know,
Right.
like define research to me, because like there's a lot of stuff out on the internet and it's not, you know, I'm always like, where's your bibliography? Like what actual research happened? And, you know, I'm guilty of that as well back in the day of looking for, especially the stuff that backed up what I wanted to hear.
Mhm, mhm.
So I wanted to find stuff that said you could cure MS with a diet change. Like I wanted it to be true that all I had to do to not have any progression with MS was to not eat gluten. Like,
Yes.
how awesome would that be? I'd be like, oh, just don't eat bread. I'm like, well, I like bread and that will be sad. But if that's the only thing I have to do, and then I'm going to be completely fine, I can do that. I'm still guilty of looking for stuff like that, even though now, I'm old and I've been doing this for a long time, and I have done real research. I can say that there's so much out there that is beneficial for us. And there's so much out there that people are spending a ton of money on that does not have science backing it up. And we're all, I think, especially in those desperate moments where you wake up and you're just like, why is it so much harder to walk today? Why is it so much harder to think today? Like, where did my brain go? Why did I, if I didn't make it to the bathroom? Like, on days like that, you go back to the internet, right? You're just like, what did I not try? What have I not done? What are the things that could still cure me?
Oh my God, this is like my story. I'm telling you, I'm just sitting here hanging on every word. I felt the same way because when I was diagnosed, instantly I was like, I have to change my diet. I was already vegetarian and I thought I ate healthy, but I really didn't. You know, I like went hardcore vegan and I was like, I can't, like you can't eat gluten, bread, but I love it. I can't do yogurt, but I love it. I mean, it was just like my brain was on overload, but I felt like, oh, I can cure myself. I can meditate. I can do, because like you, I was on medication, injectables, and then I went off. And I was like, oh, I can do meditation. I can do yoga. I can do Tai Chi. I can do acupuncture, and I'm good. But like you, little do you know that the disease is progressing. That is so fascinating to me that like you're one of the people that has it. I've never, like, until recently, I would say a year ago, I never really understood or realized, I guess, that the disease progresses even if your MRIs are clean. It like never dawned on me.
Yeah, I try not to start shit on the internet, because there's too much stuff out there, and there's like all these MS forums, and this one person's like, made a comment the other day where she was talking about how, her MRIs were great and she wasn't on any medication and like whatever. And I'm like, Mariska, don't even go there. Do not comment. I was like, it's that person's journey and they are where they need to be in their journey. But I'm just like, don't do it. I'm like, don't do it. I'm like, don't trust that your MRI is telling the whole story, because I love the way my doctor put it. He said, we know there's a rover on the moon. We know that we went to the moon. Most of us believe that. We went to the moon, there's a rover on it. We didn't bring it back, right? So we know it's there. But if you got out a telescope, you can't see it. Like, it's so small that you can't see it on there. And we know it's there, but we can't see it. And so the MRI is a very powerful tool. Like, you can see MS lesions better on an MRI, and you can't see them on an autopsy, right? It's like the MRI is a more powerful tool than actually looking at the brain. But when it comes to, we have 100 billion neurons in our brain, and let's say, they're all coded in myelin, and we can't see 100 billion neurons worth of myelin damage, right? So it's like, we can see if there's a huge amount, like if we're talking about, like if you look at stroke, for instance, an average stroke will take out 1 billion to 2 billion neurons, which sounds like a lot, a billion is a lot, right, but it's only 1% to 2% of what's there. So if you were looking on an MRI and you saw somebody had a stroke, like, it's pretty big and it shows up, but that's like 1 billion, right? And if you took it down to, okay, let's say it's 500,000 neurons, that would never show up on an MRI. A million, 20 million, like, it has to be such a huge number for you to actually be able to see it. And I think so many people don't really understand so much about MS. They don't understand like the science. They don't understand what is actually happening. They don't understand how MRIs work. They don't understand what MRIs see. They don't know what they don't see. It's like, it's sort of become my, passion and mission and whatever to know these things and to be able to explain them to people, because I feel like I got a lot of well-intentioned information that was incomplete, right? And it's like, well, I want more information. I want somebody to tell me all of the things so that, if I got my MRI report, can I actually read what the radiologist said myself, right? Because it's like, you go to your neurologist and they're like, oh, yeah, it's like, yeah, your MRI looks good. And I'm just like, well, what does T2 mean? Like, I know what T2 means, but it's like, I had to learn all of those things because I was the person who felt like I did everything right. And then still had MS, like, take away so many things, and you're just like, I don't want to give it anything else, but if stuff's happening, I also want to know, like, well, what are all of my options? This week I had written a newsletter, and I talked about how I was having all this hip pain, and I ended up going to my physiatrist, and I was explaining what physiatry is to a lot of people. And I, have this pretty large network of fitness teachers and physical therapists who follow my work. And I had many, many, many people ask me, how do you find these people? I've never heard of this professional. And I'm like, you can avoid having surgeries because this particular professional exists. And in terms of MS and living with MS, because we're, a lot of times moving a little bit weird, it puts a lot of strain on your joints and your tendons and your ligaments and your muscles. And you can have like this wear and tear damage that like an athlete would have. And in general, the people who go to physiatrists are athletes, but physiatrists can also help, the differently abled people out there, or just normal people who have pain. And I think a lot of times, you're like, oh, this hurts. And you're just going to say, oh, it's an MS thing. And you're not even going to look for an answer when there are people out there, but you're probably not getting referred to them. And depending on where you live, they might not be there, they might not be available, but there's telemedicine. There's lots of ways that you can find these different specialists and find different treatments and all these different things that are actually useful, and kind of cut through some of the, or I would say my goal is to help people cut through the stuff that doesn't really do anything. And then the kind of myths about the things we should and shouldn't be doing, and like, what is the actual science behind those things? And then, what might you try that would be, useful? And if you're making a decision about going on medication or not going on medication, and that is, I always say, not my decision to make for somebody, that you have all of the facts about first how all the medications work. It's like, what do they actually do? Like, what is this doing? Because they all sound so terrifying, right? It's like, I remember the first time I heard about Ampera, or Dalfampira, I won't pronounce it right because I have MS, but
The walking
like,
drug.
and
That's
the
what I
walking
call it,
drug,
the walking
right?
drug.
Because now it's the generic is out and you can't, like,
Right.
nobody's on Ampera anymore. But, I remember reading about it, and it's like, it was originally a bird poison. And it's like, well, how does it act as a bird poison? Because you're like, that's terrifying. It's like, I don't want to take a bird poison. And then if you learn about the medication and what it does, it's like, it, makes nerves fire faster. And the doses that they were giving to birds, it made them have seizures. So the whole idea was that the birds would not be, around, airplanes. It's basically where they were using this, because birds make airplanes crash. And they, were basically, a bird sees a bird having a seizure, and it's like, I think that we should avoid this place. And that's basically how it works. But the doses that they're giving, humans is not the same amount that they're giving a bird. So something that sounds really terrifying when you read about like the side effects or the origins of something might not be nearly as terrifying as they sound initially. And I think a lot of times the issue is that, you know, we're finding stuff on the internet and we're not having it explained to us at the 8th grade level, right? It's like, it's too complicated, or they're treating us like we're idiots, or they're not even giving us the information. And we kind of need it at, you know, here's how an MRI machine works. This is why they do an MRI machine. Here's, you know, what a spinal tap is. Here's why you probably don't need one. And, you know, kind of going through that like whole thing. But from a patient, you know, my thing is like, how can we explain this from a patient understanding, but that has, you know, all the experts also, you know, telling the story, just basically like doing similar things to what you're doing, just like interviewing experts, but from the patient point of view. It's like, I would like to know from the patient point of view, explain this to me.
Because I think people are more likely to listen to a patient versus like initially, if you're terrified, you're scared, and maybe you've had a bad experience with a doctor or any type of medical provider, I think typically you'd probably lean more towards listening to a patient and their perspective and gaining information and like hearing something, and then you go look it up and then you can talk to the doctor. You've touched on so many things. Like I am like you, and we've spoken offline, but like I'm a nerd when it comes to this. Like I want to know, what does my MRI say? Like what is my radiology report? What is it? What are all of these words? These, you know, these medical terms. Like I need to understand it for my own sanity so that I can better like, so I can make better choices or decisions in my care. Because if I'm having an MRI that shows lesions in the T region, let's say like T2 or T3, then that will explain like back pain or nerve pain in that area. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, that's my thoracic. I'm going to go look that up, you know, and then look up the whole spine. You've got your cervical, your thoracic, your lumbar, your sacral, like all of these things make sense to me. So, okay, that's why I'm like having urinary issues, because I've got lesions in that T area of the thoracic area, you know, that's affecting the bladder. And so they're all connected, and it's the science behind it and the medical terminology, like it all comes together, but the science behind all of this makes so much sense. And like you were saying, you need to research the medication, and it is terrifying. And I remember my very first injectable, I just kind of like, when we were diagnosed, there were only three
Right.
available. And so I just my neurologist is fantastic, but I listened to her, I trusted her, and we had a great rapport from the start. But I never really like researched it the way I researched medications like afterwards. And after a while, I'm like, I don't know about this. I don't know what that's going to do to me, you know. And so it allowed me to have, I think, a more open and honest conversation with my doctor, and to open up to her and say, look, this is scary to me and I want to tell you why. And so she was able to like explain, this is what it's going to do for you. I know it's scary, but this is what it's going to do. And so I think being there for patients the way that you are, the way that I am, like this will allow people to make conscious decisions and to ask the right questions and to advocate for themselves, pretty much, I think.
Well, I truly believe in the placebo and nocebo effect, right? So if you think something is going to benefit you, then it will. A lot of times,
Right.
even if it's sugar pills, right? And if you think something's going to hurt you, even if it's sugar pills, like a lot of times it will. So that's like placebo versus nocebo.
Mhm.
So I need to fully understand something to buy into it, right? I'm just like, and how is this going to work? And then what would this do? And then on this level, what would happen? So doctors, actually my doctors love me, but I'm probably a pain in their ass because I just have so many questions. And because I have studied neuroscience and because I do have a lot of like advanced certifications in movement, I'm always like, okay, so, but then if this muscle is firing this way and then this is happening, then wouldn't it be this? Like I remember I was talking to my doctor and I'm just like, so your cranial nerves are the peripheral nervous system. I was like, so why, if it's the peripheral nervous system, is MS affecting it? Because MS doesn't affect the peripheral nervous system. And he's like, excellent question. But the myelin on the cranial nerves is actually both the myelin that you see in the peripheral nervous system and what you see in the central nervous system. And I was like, okay, thank you for the explanation. But I've also had doctors, most recently I went to a physiatrist, a different physiatrist, and I went to him because my person that I go to didn't have something I wanted to try, which I wanted to try radial shockwave therapy for muscle spasticity. And I had been doing research for my big project, which we haven't named yet, but we'll get to it. But I had been doing research for my big project on like the effectiveness of Botox, just in terms of clinically, because it didn't work for me, but like, it's not about me, it's about like clinical effectiveness. And it's, you know, it had some studies where they were combining or comparing Botox with and without radial shockwave therapy. And I was like, that's a new one. I'm like, I don't know that. And I have had this spasticity problem in my left calf forever. That's like my main MS thing. And so I was like, I would be willing to try this radial shockwave therapy. I went to this doctor who's a physiatrist, mainly deals with athletes. You know, I think he does like the Washington Wizards or something. And I was telling him about, you know, wanting to try it for muscle spasticity. He's like, well, I really don't know, you know, that it's used for that or whatever. And I literally emailed him like case studies off of like PubMed. I was like, here are all the case studies and here are the settings they used and they were mostly done in Israel and Europe, which is where I think a lot of like a lot of medical research for MS is done. And then he was like, this is so interesting. And he's like, so based on this, I think we should do it this way. But I'm like, okay, so I'm going to an actual doctor explaining to him an application of something he does for my condition that he doesn't know about. And it was actually, you know, moderately helpful. It wasn't, it's like, I want it to just fix it, but nothing has just fixed it. But it was definitely better. And then in terms of like all the things that I've done, I was like, well, this one doesn't even hurt. So I was like, this is a good one for me to know, to be able to recommend to people that is something that exists that they might want to look into, because there is science behind it. But you really need to know, I mean, it's like the amount of time and energy and whatever it takes to find these answers sometimes is just like its own form of oppression of this disease, right? You're just like, I don't have time for like all this searching.
It's extra work, right?
Right.
Well, can you explain briefly what is radio shockwave therapy? Like, just
okay, so
I'm sure they're gonna be like, what?
So what it feels like, so they, use like shock waves. So it's basically like, it's a machine. The way you would see it is it almost feels like, when somebody gives you deep tissue massage and it hurts in like a good way. That's what it feels like. It's just really fast. So I think if I could have seen my leg, which I couldn't because I was laying on my stomach, I think it would have looked like when you see people jumping out of like airplanes and you see their cheeks like going, like flapping in the wind. I feel like it would have been like that, because what it does is the shock waves, they're actually radial waves, they go deeper into the tissue. So it's basically like a fascial treatment. So they're trying to break up all this fascia and all this gunkiness that can like prevent like the nerves from being able to move through the muscle correctly and prevent things from, working well. So the main use for it is for like plantar fasciitis. So it just breaks up all those adhesions and the things that make the plantar fascia super tight, but then they can do it anywhere on the body. So I had him go like from my hamstring, because your calf actually connects behind your knee. So my leg hyperextends. A lot of people don't know why their leg hyperextends when they have MS. And I'm like, well, your leg hyperextends probably because you have spasticity in your quad and your calf, and that's really common. But since your calf connects really high and almost kind of feeds into your hamstring, he did like a little bit of lower hamstring, and then he did my calf muscles all the way to my Achilles tendon, and didn't feel anything after the first time. After the second time, it was the first time my leg didn't hurt in years. I have to say that didn't stay, sadly, but it was the first time my leg didn't hurt in years. And I was just like, well, that's different. It's like it doesn't hurt. And then I did 4 times. It's not covered by insurance, and it's not, I would say it's in the medium expensive. It was about $175 a visit, which, I mean, that's not like crazy expensive in the MS world. It's not super cheap, but after 4, it definitely felt like it, loosened up. And then he said, if you know that it works, then you'd probably come back and do another round.
4. Okay. Yeah.
So the basic recommendation was after 4, you should be able to see if it worked for you at all. And then after, then you could do another 2, because like a normal round would be like 6. And then if 6 really was helpful, then maybe you do another couple. But it was like something I had not really known about. And then I live in Washington, DC as well. So I was like, DC has every kind of doctor you can imagine. I'm like, I'm sure I can find something somewhere around here that does it. And because I have a friend who's a physiatrist, I just asked her if she knew anybody who did it, and she recommended this guy.
I wonder if it would help my back. Oh, I have terrible back pain. And I tell you, it goes all the way from the top down to my glutes and my hamstrings and
well, I mean, the first thing I would recommend is that you see a physiatrist, which is a physical medicine doctor. And the thing that they do, and that's why I just love this form of medicine so much, is because they look at your muscles and joints and tendons and ligaments under ultrasound. So they literally can look at it and then show you on the screen. They're like, see that? That's not supposed to look like that. And then they can go in, like I've had them do all sorts of things. Like I had a really horrible leg break on my MS leg, just keep it exciting. And I had like all this meniscus damage and all these torn tendons and things that weren't repaired. I had 2 surgeries and they weren't all repaired during the 2 surgeries. And then I did plasma-rich protein injections. I did prolotherapy. Prolotherapy can fix a lot of muscle tears and ligament tears. But like if your back is in like a lot of pain, you could have, as a Pilates teacher, I would look at it as like, where's the muscle imbalance? Like what's pulling and what's creating tension. But you can literally, like I said, go to a physiatrist. They would look at it under ultrasound and they would be able to tell you what is pulling or what is, if something's messed up. And then they can do something like, I'm sure you've heard of dry needling. They do something called wet needling, which is way more effective than dry needling and lasts longer. And what they do is they'll go in with saline, and instead of just in a dry needle, they'll go into a trigger point, like where you have a fascial restriction, and they kind of stick the needle in, and it's usually an acupuncture needle, and they wiggle it around till your muscle spasms around it. Well, in wet needling, what they do is they do a little bit of injection of saline, and you can actually watch on the ultrasound the fascia that's all tight. You can watch it just like break apart to where it's not all gunked together. So like if you have a knot in your muscle, you have a fascial restriction. It could be that spasticity had played a role in it, but like work with a lot of people who don't have, you know, any neurological issues, and they get all these like muscle knots and all these different issues. And like, there's a lot of things that you can do to fix that. And like living with all these knots and stuff in your muscles just causes pain and is an unnecessary pain that is treatable. And I think that it goes back to, if you have MS, a lot of people are like, well, you have MS, and then they'll kind of blow you off. I remember I went to a podiatrist because my foot hurt, and he said, well, you have MS, so it's only going to get worse. And I was like, well, that is not scientifically accurate, one. And somebody gave you a medical license, which is terrifying. But you are also saying that you don't feel like I'm worthy of not being in pain. Like, really? Like, what the hell is that about? You know, and I think a lot of people would just, because it's a doctor, you know, and you're like, it's a doctor, and that you would just agree with that. And that's tragic, right? We shouldn't be accepting anything less than a doctor wanting to make our lives as good as possible and returning us to as much function as possible. And, you know, a lot of times people are like, well, you know, you've had MS for 20 years and you're doing so great for someone who's had MS for 20 years. And I'm like, okay, but I'm not doing as well as I want to be doing.
Yes.
Right. And I'm allowed to want that, you know, like,
absolutely.
and I think a lot of times people, and that's not, I mean, it is, I guess, some ableism that we're putting on ourselves, or some spiritual, you know, some toxic positivity we're putting on ourselves. But I also think that it's not unreasonable to want to at least get as much as you can get, right? You know, it's like, and that's always been like the kind of person I am. So when we were talking about the kind of person I am, I'm like, that's the kind of person I am. I am like going to be the most persistent, stubborn person when it comes to trying to figure stuff out. And I do get to the times where I'm just like, I have reached my capacity of trying or caring. But then sometimes, you know, I'll get another wave of like, okay, I've decided I can care again, or I can try again, or I can see, you know, if I did Botox a fourth time, does it do anything? Because it didn't do anything the first 3 times. But I might have something like that, you know, happen. But in general, I feel like we don't get, we are generally shortchanged by a system that's not set up for us, where we almost need a concierge to take us through life with MS along all of its stages and all of its potential symptoms, and then explain them to us, explain, you know, what are options, what are interesting things that are out there that can help, you know, prevent disability, prevent pain. That's like, that is one of my main things, is like, we should not be in pain, right? Pain is treatable.
Yeah. I love that. A concierge, an MS concierge. Wouldn't that be fantastic?
Right.
I want to get into the work that you do and the project that you're working on, and thinking that should I stop it and then start it again so it's not like so long? You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
also, so as the sun is changing, I'm
Yes.
clearly still bright right now, but I'm in a room that
I'm
literally
not.
has like no light in it.
Yeah.
So I just have natural light. I mean, there's a big bay window, and then there's another window.
Yeah.
So as long as there's still light, I'm good, but it probably just, I'm going to start getting like darker and darker and darker. But if you're only using audio, you know,
Well,
that doesn't.
it's up to you. It's up to you. We can do audio and visual, or audio. We can do audio only. It's
I mean,
fine.
either,
Like,
I mean, you can do both, or you can do, do you have a Mac?
no, I do, but it's so old, and like, I just have a Dell.
I was going to say, I'm like, I can teach you how to edit stuff really quickly on a Mac. But if you don't have a Mac, then I don't know how to do it on a PC. So
I have access to a Mac. My partner has one. I can use it.
yeah, I mean, it's actually like really easy to edit video off of like the
Zoom.
video that's going to be saved to your Zoom account. Because you can literally just go in, because there's the chunk where you left. That's easy to cut out. And then there's this chunk where we're talking about nothing. That's easy to cut out. It's actually super easy to do. So I can just do a Zoom and show you. I'll just do it where I'm on my computer, so I can go into a program that if somebody has a Mac, it comes with the Mac, and then I'll just show you how to edit chunks out.
Oh my God, yay. Okay, that's perfect.
Super easy.
Yeah.
It's like it's a huge part of what I do with my life is edit video. So, but yeah, we can stop and then I'll just come back.
Yeah, so I'll open this up again, and then I'll just say, okay, so can you talk about your
or
project?
You know what you can do? Actually, you know what you can do? Actually, because I learned this doing my project, just hit the record button and hit stop recording.